My son was fighting for his life in the ICU when my own family drained $850,000 from my account. My brother-in-law smirked and said, "We needed it more than you." I couldn't breathe, but they had no clue what was coming next. Then, boom, the front door burst open and... There are moments in life that tear you apart, that shatter everything you thought you knew. For me, it was standing in a hospital hallway, my 8-year-old son clinging to life in the ICU, only to discover my own family had brutally drained every penny I had, $850,000, every cent I'd saved for his survival. And when I confronted them, my brother-in-law just smirked, looked me dead in the eye, and sneered, "We needed it more than you." I remember sitting in that hard plastic chair, the kind that digs into your back, outside Eli's ICU room. Hours bled into each other. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to everything, and the relentless beep, beep, beep of machines behind that closed door felt like a hammer striking my chest. My son, my little Eli, just 8 years old, was in there, tangled in more tubes than I could bear to count. I'm a 39-year-old single dad, running my own design business, but none of that mattered then. Not one single bit. The only thing that mattered was Eli, his tiny breaths, his fight for life. Those 2 weeks. They were a blur of whispered prayers and sleepless nights. Every single dollar I'd ever saved, every late night I'd pulled, every impossible client I'd bent over backwards for, it was all for him. It was our safety net. Our future. I clung to the belief that no matter what else life threw our way, at least we'd be okay financially. That belief, fragile as it was the only thing keeping me upright, keeping me pacing those endless hospital hallways. Then, almost on autopilot, I pulled out my phone. I don't even remember why. Maybe just habit. Maybe I needed to see that number, to reassure myself that when the hospital dropped the next astronomical bill, I could handle it. The banking app loaded. I blinked. Once. Twice. My breath hitched. My stomach plummeted. Checking account, 0. Savings, 0. Business account, 0. 0. It had to be a glitch. A mistake. I refreshed the screen, tried another card. Same thing. My hands started to tremble. The hospital walls felt like they were pressing in on me, crushing me. My own heartbeat roared so loud in my ears, I almost missed a nurse calling out a name down the hall. I somehow managed to dial the bank, my voice a ragged whisper as I choked out my details. The woman on the other end, her voice so unnervingly calm, rattled off a confirmation. "Yes, sir. I see several large transfers overnight. They were authorized from a recognized device linked to your account." "No." I croaked, my voice cracking, raw with disbelief. "That's impossible. I didn't authorize anything." She cut me off, her tone carefully measured. "Sir, I understand this is difficult, but the security questions were answered correctly. The transfers were made between 11:40 p.m. and 4 a.m. A punch to the gut. That's what it felt like. Someone who knew everything about me, had systematically emptied every single account. I hung up, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone right there on the linoleum. By the time I stumbled out of that hospital, the sky had swallowed the last of the daylight. Portland's cool night air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. I drove on pure autopilot, my mind a swirling storm of disbelief and dread, until the lake house loomed into view. That house, man, it was supposed to be a sanctuary. A place for family barbecues, for summer laughter. That night, it felt like enemy territory. I didn't even knock. I just pushed the door open, the old wood groaning a protest under my foot. My steps echoed, loud and stark, through the silent house. The laughter that had been spilling from the living room died instantly. There he was, Gideon, sprawled on the couch, a whiskey glass dangling from his fingers like he was king of the castle. My sister, Serena, sat beside him, her eyes flitting from me to the floor, shrinking into herself. "Where is it?" I demanded, my voice coming out harsher than I intended, raw with fury. Gideon's lips curled into that smug little smile, the one I'd despised since the day he first walked into our lives. "Well, hello to you, too." I took a step closer, my fists clenching so tight my nails dug into my palms. "Don't play games with me. My accounts are empty. All of them. Where is my money?" He leaned back, took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, and then, with utterly chilling nonchalance, he said it. "We needed it more than you." The words hit me like a physical blow. My ears rang. For a second, I couldn't even grasp what he'd just said. "Excuse me." I finally choked out, the air leaving my lungs. Serena, barely a whisper, finally spoke. "Don't make this about you. I actually laughed. A hollow, broken sound. Don't make this about me. $850,000. My son is in the ICU fighting for his life, and you two drained me dry. How is this not about me? Gideon just shrugged, bored. You'll figure it out. You always do. The rage boiling inside me threatened to erupt, to consume everything, but I swallowed it down. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me shatter. My entire world was burning around me, and they just sat there, in their comfortable bubble, sipping whiskey like they hadn't just destroyed everything I had. I took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing my voice to a calm I didn't feel. Then you won't mind what's coming next. They exchanged a quick glance. Then Gideon let out a short, dismissive laugh. Serena even gave a little chuckle, like I was some pathetic joke they'd heard 1,000 times. Smug. Untouchable. But then, just for a fleeting second, I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible crack in Gideon's mask. I stepped back onto the porch, the brutal night air pressing against me like a physical weight. Their hollow laughter, sharp as broken glass, still echoed in my ears. My phone buzzed in my hand. Serena. The text read, "Don't make this about you. We're all struggling." I stared at it, my thumb hovering, wishing I could erase those words with sheer will. My son was fighting for his life, dependent on machines to breathe, and she had the gall to send me that. My throat tightened, a burning knot of indignation. For a split second, I considered just leaving. Walking away. Letting them have their pathetic little charade. But then I knew. They'd win. They'd paint me as the crazy one, the bitter sibling, a failure. No. I stood there, staring at the warm glow from the windows, and reminded myself, this wasn't about them. This was about Eli. About every single hour I'd toiled to secure our future. By the time I walked back inside, the lake house had transformed. The earlier chaos had smoothed into the hum of a family dinner. I stepped into the dining room, and it felt like I'd stumbled into another dimension. The table was set for 12, every plate and glass arranged with meticulous, almost chilling, precision. The scent of roasted meat and expensive wine mingled in the air. Everyone else looked so relaxed, laughing, exchanging pleasantries as if it were any other night. But the moment they saw me, the room subtly shifted. Eyes flickered my way, then darted back to their conversations, to their plates. Not one person offered me a seat. No one even acknowledged I'd returned. I found my own spot at the far end of the table, as far from their oblivious laughter as possible, tucked away in the shadow of Gideon's grand presence. He sat at the head, his arm draped casually over Serena's chair, basking in all the attention like he was the benevolent host of some grand event. I barely tasted the food. My fork scraped against the plate in slow, deliberate movements. My mind kept spiraling back to Eli, his pale, fragile face, the relentless beeping of the monitors, and then back to the crushing zero on my bank account. How could any of them eat, laugh, and celebrate so comfortably, knowing what they'd done? Halfway through the meal, Gideon decided to perform. You know, he drawled, raising his glass as if sharing some profound wisdom, some people just aren't cut out for managing money. His voice, dripping with fake sympathy, carried through the room. It's sad, really. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the guests. No one, not one single person, dared to meet my eyes. Serena just stared at her plate, her fingers idly tapping the stem of her wine glass. No defense. No apology. Just silence. My stomach churned. I put my fork down. I wanted to scream, to lay every brutal detail of their betrayal bare for the entire room to witness. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, cataloging every word, every dismissive glance. Let them think they'd humiliated me. Let them think I was beaten. As the evening dragged on, I studied them. I watched Gideon wield his words like insidious weapons, subtle enough for plausible deniability, yet sharp enough to wound deeply. I watched Serena lean into his protection, hiding behind his cruelty as if it excused her own horrifying complicity. And I watched everyone else, carefully avoiding me, choosing the shallow comfort of ignorance over the painful truth. I stayed quiet. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Every insult, every look of pity, every moment of their calculated exclusion, it was all fuel. They had stolen my money, tried to strip me of my dignity, tried to erase my worth. But they couldn't touch my resolve. By the time dessert arrived, I wasn't the same person who had walked through that door earlier. I wasn't just the grieving father, or the desperate survivor clinging to a fragile hope. I was someone pushed to the absolute edge, and I had decided, with a cold, clear certainty, that I was not going to fall. But their humiliation wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I lingered in the hallway, letting the sound of their voices fade into the quiet hum of crickets outside. That laughter, still ringing in my head, clashed violently with the image of Eli in his hospital bed. My hands were cold, my fingers stiff around the phone I hadn't let go of since Serena's text. After a few shaky breaths, I forced myself back into the dining room. And that's when I saw it. My seat. It had been moved. I'd been at the far end, trying to blend into the background, but now I was practically next to the kitchen door, in a spot where servers would constantly brush past me. It was a clear, deliberate message: I didn't belong. Someone had done this on purpose, and they wanted me to know it. I stood there for a moment, taking in the perfect, pristine scene, candles glowing low, crystal glasses catching the light, Gideon at the opposite end, leaning back, completely at ease. He didn't even bother to glance up. Every soft scrape of a fork, every muffled giggle from the other end of the table felt utterly choreographed. I'd never felt so visible and so invisible at the same time. They didn't need to shout. This was more cutting than any screaming match. It was a quiet, calculated humiliation that told me exactly where I stood, outside their perfect little circle. I slid into my new spot without a word, the chair creaking loudly as I pulled it in. My hands itched, a primal urge to just grab my bag and leave, but I stayed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was because I knew walking out would be exactly what they wanted. And then I saw it. A familiar glint caught my eye, reflecting the low chandelier light. Gideon raised his arm, gesturing to someone across the table. And there it was. On his wrist. My father's watch. For a second, I literally couldn't breathe. That Omega watch wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was my father's watch. The one he'd worn to every single meaningful occasion. The one he'd pressed into my hand, frail and cool, just 2 days before he passed away. I could still hear his voice, so clear, saying, "This stays with you. It's part of you now." And here it was. On Gideon's wrist. I gripped the napkin in my lap so tightly the fabric twisted and tore. He actually tapped the face of the watch as he laughed at something one of my uncles said. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he wanted me to see it. Through the blur of conversations and clinking glasses, my pulse roared in my ears, a frantic drumbeat. I replayed that moment in the hospital, my father's hand, so fragile, pressing that watch into mine. How in the hell did Gideon have it now? The rest of dinner dragged on in a hazy, suffocating dream. I couldn't taste the food. I barely registered the small talk. All I could focus on was that watch, gleaming mockingly, and the dull, suffocating ache in my chest. When dessert was served, I stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing fresh air. My feet carried me to the hallway, where the buzz of voices dulled. I didn't have to wait long. Serena slipped out a few minutes later, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. Why does he have Dad's watch? My voice was low, but it came out sharper than I intended, brittle with controlled anger. She stopped mid-step, but she didn't turn to face me. It's just a watch, she said quietly. Too quickly. No, I said, stepping closer, my voice gaining strength. Don't do that. Dad gave it to me. He told me it was mine. So tell me, why is your husband wearing it like some goddamn trophy? She finally glanced back, her expression unreadable, carefully blank. You always make things so difficult, she whispered. It's just sharing the family legacy. You need to let things go. Let it go. My heart hammered in my throat. First the money, and now this. Do you even hear yourself? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly small, retreating, as if into Gideon's shadow even when he wasn't there. Please, just don't start something tonight. Not here. Her words weren't a defense. They were a pathetic dismissal, a desperate plea for me to stay quiet, to preserve their twisted illusion of harmony. I didn't answer. There was simply nothing left to say. I walked back to the guest room, the one they'd relegated me to in the farthest corner of the house, and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. My hands were still trembling, but not from shock anymore. Now, it was from a cold, simmering rage, building beneath the surface. My father was gone. My savings were stolen. And my own sister had chosen to stand by, complicit, while her husband paraded around in something that was never, ever his. That night, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like an eternity. I thought about Eli, about my father, about how easily they'd tried to erase me from everything that truly mattered. And I made myself a promise. A silent, steel-hard vow. I would not let them erase me. Not as a father, not as a son, not as anything. But the watch, as agonizing as it was, wasn't the only thing they'd stolen from me. I didn't sleep. Not a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gideon's wrist, my father's watch gleaming like a cold, calculating taunt. I saw Serena's blank, carefully constructed face when I'd confronted her. I felt the crushing weight of their dismissal, the way they made me feel like an outsider in a house my own father had built. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the walls of that guest room slowly closing in on me, suffocating me. Around midnight, I gave up even trying to pretend I could sleep. The house was utterly still, save for the faint hum of a distant refrigerator. I got up, padding barefoot into the hallway, careful not to make the old wood creak. I'd spent countless holidays in this place, man. Christmas mornings in pajamas, summer barbecues with my dad on the porch, laughter echoing through these very halls. But now, those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I found myself drawn towards the study. My father had always kept his most important papers in there. Even after he passed, Serena had insisted the room be left exactly as it was. But tonight, something felt altered. Different. When I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of old leather and dust hit me, but the room itself just didn't look right. The desk drawers weren't as neat as I remembered. Folders that should have been perfectly aligned were slightly askew, some stacked awkwardly. I flicked on the small desk lamp, its yellow glow making the shadows dance unsettlingly across the walls, and I just started pulling things out. It was aimless at first. I didn't even know what I was looking for. But then my fingers brushed against the edge of a large envelope, tucked beneath some old tax documents. My pulse quickened. My name was on it, written in my father's unmistakable hand. I slid it open, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside were estate documents. Updated ones. For a moment, I thought my exhausted brain was misreading them. But no. The words were painfully clear. The notarization date stared back at me like a personal accusation. My father's original will, the one he told me about himself, ensured I received a share of the lake house, along with part of his business assets. But these papers stripped me of almost everything. Key properties, liquid assets, even portions of the family business. Quietly reassigned. All in Serena and Gideon's names. My throat tightened, a dry, choked sob. I had to sit down before my knees completely gave out. I read through each page, my heart pounding louder and louder with every devastating line. The dates. They were months after my father's funeral. It didn't make any sense. He couldn't have signed these. He was gone. The horrifying realization sank into me like a stone dropping into a deep, dark well. They hadn't just taken my savings. They'd taken my inheritance. They had brazenly tampered with the one thing my father had specifically left to ensure I'd be okay. I wanted to scream. To wake them all up and demand answers. But the house remained silent. And in that suffocating silence, something else began to settle over me. Fury, yes, a searing, righteous fury. But also, a cold, hard clarity. They thought I wouldn't find this. They thought I wouldn't fight back. I sat there for what felt like hours, the papers spread out on the desk, my fingers tracing my father's signature. Whether real or forged, I didn't know yet. My chest ached with a profound, raw grief, but my mind was sharpening. It was clearer than it had been in days. They've taken everything, I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible in the heavy stillness. But they don't know me as well as they think. I gathered the documents carefully, folding them back into the envelope. As I turned off the lamp and stepped back into the dark hallway, I felt a fundamental shift within me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about erasure. About them rewriting the entire story of my family without me in it. And they were not going to get away with it. Not a chance. And then, as if to grind me even further into the ground, Gideon made his boldest, most audacious move yet. The morning dawned heavy and gray, as if the very sky understood the fresh hell waiting for me. I'd barely slept. By the time I walked into the living room, Gideon had already staged his twisted scene. Relatives I hadn't seen in months were gathered, perched awkwardly on armrests, filling every couch. Gideon stood in the center, a manila envelope in his hand, a malevolent master of ceremonies. That same infuriating, smug curve played on his lips. "Glad you're here," he called out, his voice syrupy sweet, loud enough for everyone to hear. We were just about to clear the air. My stomach plummeted. I hated his tone. I hated the way Serena stood behind him, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the carpet as if she wished the floor would just swallow her whole. He opened the envelope with theatrical slowness, like a magician about to unveil a grand illusion. "You've been saying I took your money," he began, glancing at me with a condescending smile. "But here's the thing. That's not how it happened. I didn't respond. I couldn't. He held up a document, flipping it for the room to see. You all should know, he announced, his voice booming with false authority. She voluntarily entrusted me with $850,000. It was a loan for a family investment. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. He walked towards me, waving the papers. Your signature is right here. And there it was. My name. My handwriting. Or what could pass for it, damn near perfect, convincing enough to almost make me believe I'd signed it in some forgotten, sleep-deprived haze. Gasps rippled through the room. A few aunts leaned closer, their faces etched with horror and curiosity. One of my cousins murmured something. Well, that makes sense. See? Gideon said, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. You're trying to make me out to be a thief, but I've only been holding what you gave me, for us. For us. As if this had ever, for one single second, been for anyone but him. My knees felt weak, like they might give out from under me. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How could I argue with a piece of paper that said otherwise? How could I defend myself when my own family was already looking at me like I'd completely lost my mind? I scanned the room, desperately searching for someone, anyone, to back me up. Serena wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the floor, a child caught in a lie. And that told me everything I needed to know. You forged that, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper, raw with unshed tears. Gideon chuckled, a sharp, dismissive sound that sliced through the room. Of course, you'd say that. That's what people do when they regret their decisions. They rewrite history. The room seemed to shrink around me. I could feel their judgment, a crushing weight pressing down on my chest. A few relatives exchanged worried glances, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. Maybe she really is unstable. Maybe Gideon is telling the truth. I wanted to scream. To rip those papers from his smug hands and set them on fire. But I didn't. I couldn't. My throat closed around the words, choking them back. I felt utterly small, utterly voiceless. By the time I walked out of that house, I don't even remember saying goodbye. Hours later, I was in my car, parked outside the ICU again. I don't remember the drive. I just remember staring at the dashboard, numb. My son was inside, still fighting for his life, tubes and machines doing what his tiny body couldn't. And here I was, stripped of everything. My money, my dignity, even my rightful place in my own family story. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for my tears to dry on my cheeks, for my breathing to slow to that hollow, defeated rhythm. My gaze drifted to the passenger seat. Eli's stuffed blue bear, worn soft from years of bedtime hugs, was slumped there. I picked it up, pressing it to my chest. And in that small, familiar weight, I felt a flicker. A spark. My resolve. If I give up, I whispered to the quiet car, what does that make me? What does that make me for him? I couldn't let them win. Not like this. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, a single, unexpected voice gave me the first glimmer of light. That voice, that spark of hope, came just when I'd stopped expecting anything good in this world. It was late evening, the ICU waiting room cast in that eerie, clinical glow of fluorescent lights, the constant hum of machines a cruel lullaby. I'd been sitting there for hours, head in my hands, utterly numb. Gideon's false papers. My family's gutless silence. Eli's tiny, fragile body fighting for every breath behind that closed door. Time in that place didn't move, it just pressed down on you, dull and relentless. My mind was trapped, replaying Gideon's face, that sickening smirk, those forged signatures that looked so damn real I'd almost believed them myself. I kept replaying the scene in the living room, over and over, each time inventing a sharper comeback, a way to make them actually hear me. But every imagined response fell flat, because in the real world, he'd walked away with everyone's sympathy, and my entire life was in his smug hands. I didn't even notice Marcy until she was sitting right beside me. Hey, she said softly, her voice hesitant, like she wasn't sure I'd even want to hear it. I blinked at her, disoriented. Marcy. My cousin. The one who always stayed out of family drama. The one who just smiled politely at holidays and avoided anything resembling conflict. She wasn't supposed to be here. I couldn't just sit with it, she blurted out quickly, her eyes darting towards the hallway as if checking for spies. I had to tell you what I know. What do you mean? My voice was hoarse, raw, like I hadn't used it in days. She twisted her hands in her lap, a nervous habit. Gideon, he likes to drink late at night. Whiskey, usually. And when he does, he talks too much. Something tight, cold, and hard began to form in my chest. "Marcy," I said, carefully, my breath catching. "What are you trying to tell me?" She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "He said, he drained your accounts. Said he forged the papers so no one would ever believe you. He laughed about it. Said you'd handed him the rope to hang you with." His words, not mine. The room tilted. For a second, I had to grip the edge of my chair, trying to ground myself. Then Marcy, with shaking hands, pulled out her phone. I recorded part of it. I didn't know what to do with it, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. She slid the phone across to me. My fingers, still clumsy, pressed play. And there it was. His voice. That lazy, arrogant drawl. "She's too naive to fight back. Signed everything like a good little mark." He laughed. Laughed. Like ruining my life was some kind of sport. It was him. No question. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the sound of his cruel laughter echoing in my head, before I finally looked at Marcy. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her eyes, usually so placid, were filled with something that looked a lot like guilt. "Because I should have said something earlier. And because you need help. I know someone who can give it to you. An old college friend of mine, Drake. He's a legal investigator. He deals with people like Gideon for a living." For the first time in weeks, I felt air fill my lungs completely. Fully. A way forward. Marcy must have seen it on my face, because she touched my arm lightly. "You don't have to do this alone." That single sentence hit harder than Gideon's lies ever could. I wasn't alone. By the time we left the hospital for a late-night diner, the crushing heaviness had shifted. It was still there, sure, a shadow, but underneath it, a new current ran. Cautious hope. Raw, burning determination. We sat in a quiet booth, nursing terrible coffee, while Marcy laid out what Drake could do: gather evidence, track financial trails, make all those dirty family investments unravel in a courtroom where Gideon couldn't possibly spin his lies. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, staring at the steam rising from it like a hazy future. "I'm done being their scapegoat," I said, more to myself than to her, my voice low and steady. "If Gideon wants a war, he'll get one." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I actually meant it. The first real step was gathering enough evidence to bring their whole rotten empire crashing down. It all started right there, with a choice. To stop surviving. To start fighting. Sitting by Eli's bedside again, feeling his little fingers curled around mine, I knew I couldn't afford another day of paralysis. His cheeks had a little more color now, and that small change lit something primal inside me. Grief had sharpened me. Anger had given me purpose. They'd taken my money, my family name, even my father's legacy. But they were absolutely not going to take my son's future. Marcy kept her word. 2 days later, she walked me into a sleek, modern co-working space downtown, all glass walls and the soft hum of printers. That's where I met Drake. He was everything Gideon wasn't: focused, efficient, no time for theatrics. He shook my hand firmly, his dark eyes studying me with an intensity that told me he was already taking inventory of my entire case. "Marcy filled me in," he said, his voice steady, no judgment. "We can nail him, but we need airtight proof. Digital paper. And ideally, his own words. That's how you win." For the first time in weeks, I heard someone talk about winning, not just surviving. He laid out the plan: retrieve a full record of every login and transaction tied to my stolen accounts, secure copies of those altered inheritance documents, and, if I had the stomach for it, catch Gideon bragging on camera. "He'll slip," Drake assured me, a grim certainty in his tone. "People like him always do." Over the next several days, my life became a relentless cycle: mornings with Eli at the ICU, afternoons with Drake, and nights spent lying awake, piecing together the terrifying puzzle. It became a strange, exhausting routine. Watching Drake work was an education in itself. He meticulously combed through my laptop, my phone backups, even cloud accounts I hadn't accessed in months. One afternoon, he called me over, his voice sharp. "Take a look at this." On his screen was a damning log. Dozens of unauthorized logins to my accounts, all within a tight, suspicious window. "These were made from your devices," he said, pointing to the timestamps. "Except you weren't the one logging in. See the IP addresses. They match Gideon's home and the lake house. He hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks." I stared at the screen, part of me boiling with fury at his staggering arrogance, another part numbly grateful for it. Every click Drake made, every file he pulled, pieced together the brutal story of how Gideon systematically bled me dry. But Drake wasn't done. "Now for the will," he said. I swallowed hard. That word still felt like a fresh, gaping wound. He explained how we'd plant a tiny camera at the lake house. "You stage a visit," he told me, his plan chillingly precise. "Act like you're letting things go. Get him comfortable. And then, let the whiskey do the rest." So, I did it. A week later, I drove back to that place, a serene smile plastered on my face when I wanted to scream, pretending to accept Serena's shallow, murmured apologies, letting Gideon believe I'd been utterly broken, finally brought to submission. I tucked the camera exactly where Drake had instructed, every step rehearsed in my head until it felt like second nature. 2 days later, we sat in that glass-walled office, watching the footage together. And there he was. Gideon, leaning back in his chair, drink in hand, his voice dripping with nauseating self-satisfaction. "We rewrote history," he boasted to a cousin, oblivious to the tiny lens hidden nearby. "The will, the assets, all of it. Finally put that legacy in the right hands." The right hands. Drake muted the video and looked at me, his expression grave. "That's it. That's your nail in the coffin." I sat there, silent for a long moment, letting his words sink in, letting the full weight of his casual cruelty wash over me. He wasn't just careless. He was proud. Proud of gutting my father's last wishes. Proud of utterly destroying me. My pulse steadied. My voice, when it came, was cold, clear, and unwavering. "They wanted war in silence," I said, looking Drake dead in the eye. "I'll give them justice in daylight." The invitation went out 3 days before, crafted in my most neutral, almost disarmingly calm tone. "We need to end this fighting. Let's meet, all of us, at the lake house." I made it sound like I wanted peace, like I was finally ready to bury the hatchet, to simply let things go. It was a performance, the role of a lifetime, and I played it well. By the time I arrived that afternoon, the house was alive with a low, uneasy hum of conversation. Cars lined the gravel drive, and inside, aunts and cousins mingled, their voices hushed, but undeniably eager for the drama they sensed brewing. Serena stood by the kitchen counter, twisting a napkin in her hands, her eyes studiously avoiding mine. Gideon, of course, was in the absolute center of it all. Whiskey in hand, relaxed, smirking, like a man about to enjoy his glorious victory lap. "Finally decided to talk like adults," he sneered, the moment I stepped into the living room. His tone was saccharine, but it dripped with condescension. I ignored the bait. "Let's sit." The family gathered in the main room, filling the long couches and chairs, some standing stiffly along the walls. I deliberately took the single armchair directly opposite Gideon, feeling the crushing weight of everyone's stares. But I held my ground. "This isn't easy," I began, my voice calm, steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "But we need to talk about what's been done. To me. To my father's legacy. To my son." Gideon chuckled, a short, dismissive puff of air. "Oh, this again. You really need to let it go. We've all been through hard times." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened the laptop I'd placed on the coffee table. The entire room went utterly still at the sight of it. "Before you dismiss me," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "you should hear this." I pressed play. Gideon's own voice filled the room. Drunken. Brash. And absolutely damning. "We rewrote history," he boasted to his cousin. "The will, the assets, all of it. Finally put that legacy in the right hands." The right hands. Gasps ripped through the room. A few aunts exchanged horrified, wide-eyed glances. One of my uncles muttered a low curse under his breath. Serena went utterly pale, her napkin clutched so tightly I thought it might tear. "You." Gideon started, his face reddening, but I simply raised a hand. "I'm not finished." Drake's voice came next, crisp and measured, echoing through the speakerphone. "I've conducted a forensic analysis of the financial records," he stated, his words like cold, hard facts. "Every unauthorized transfer leads directly back to Gideon's devices and IP addresses. We also traced the timestamps of login to your cloud accounts, all occurring in the early hours of the morning, while you were documented elsewhere." I turned to Gideon, my gaze unwavering. "You said I gave you that money as a loan. Tell them why you were logging into my accounts at 3 a.m. Tell them why my father's will, which specifically secured me my share of this house, was rewritten in your favor months after his death." He shot up from his seat, his face a terrifying shade of crimson, his mouth moving faster than his brain could keep up. "You're twisting things. You've always been unhinged. They all know it." But no one rushed to agree with him. The aunts stared blankly at their laps. My uncles pointedly avoided his gaze. Even Serena's shoulders sagged, like she'd finally given up the exhausting task of upholding his lies. You've stolen enough, I said, rising slowly to my feet, my voice calm, but with an edge of steel. And today, it ends. The timing, honestly, was almost cinematic. The front door burst open with a loud thud, and uniformed officers swept inside, firm and deliberate. Gideon Price, the lead officer, called out, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. You're under arrest for fraud, theft, and identity tampering. We have a warrant. Chaos erupted. Relatives jumped to their feet, some shouting, others crying out in disbelief. Gideon's bravado completely cracked, replaced by a frantic sputtering as he tried to talk over the officer reading his rights. Serena's sobs broke through the noise as she covered her face with her hands. The cuffs clicked around his wrists, a sound that, for the first time in months, let my lungs expand fully, completely. He glared at me as they led him out, his voice shaking with impotent fury. You think this is over? You think. But the rest of his threats were swallowed by the decisive slam of the front door. A profound silence filled the room. Serena finally looked at me. Really looked at me. With an expression I hadn't seen in years. Gratitude? Shame? I couldn't quite tell. She whispered something, a tiny, broken sound I couldn't decipher. I nodded, but said nothing. The time for words had passed. I turned to the rest of the family, their faces a stunned mix of shock and, perhaps, a glimmer of relief. This wasn't just about money, I said quietly, my voice resonating in the sudden stillness. This was about my father. About Eli. About every single one of you who let this man take whatever he wanted because you were too afraid to call him out. No one spoke. I didn't need them to. As I walked out of that house, leaving their stunned silence behind me, one thought rang in my head like a triumphant bell. Gideon's empire had finally, irrevocably, started to crumble. The weeks after the raid, after Gideon's arrest, passed like I was moving through thick, murky water, slow, heavy, but with a new, steady current underneath. Gideon's rotten empire unraveled piece by piece. His insufferable smugness was replaced by chilling silence, his untouchable persona utterly dismantled by handcuffs and cold, hard court dates. I spent those weeks buried in paperwork, working relentlessly with Drake, making countless visits to Eli, and trying desperately to remember what normal even felt like. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, there was a tentative knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find Serena standing there. But it wasn't the Serena I'd known for years, the perfectly composed, sharp-tongued woman living in Gideon's shadow. This was a stripped-down version of her. No makeup, her hair pulled into a limp, tired ponytail, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She clutched her coat around her like a shield, but it wasn't enough to hide her raw vulnerability. Can I come in? She asked, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the insistent patter of rain on the hallway window. I stepped aside, letting her into my small living room. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the scuffed floor, as if she needed to find the courage somewhere in the worn tiles. And then it came. The words tumbled out of her in broken, fragmented pieces. I was so scared, she whispered, her voice cracking. I let him control everything. He told me what to think, what to say. He made me believe I'd be nothing without him. And I let him turn me against you. The sheer weight of it pressed against my chest. This was the sister I'd grown up with. The one I'd mourned, thought I'd lost, long before Gideon ever drained my accounts or maliciously rewrote my father's will. Tears streaked down her face as she sank into the armchair, collapsing as if her legs had finally given out. I didn't just lose a husband, she sobbed. I lost myself. And I let him take you from me, too. I'm so sorry. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. My first, visceral instinct was anger. A hot, burning anger for her silence, for her complicity, for the way she'd stood by him while I was utterly humiliated in front of our entire family. But beneath that anger, a deep sadness swirled. She wasn't just apologizing for Gideon. She was apologizing for every single moment she hadn't been my sister when I had desperately needed her most. You could have stopped him, I said finally, my voice low, heavy with unspoken pain. She nodded, her chin trembling. I know. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The rain kept tapping against the window, a quiet, mournful rhythm to our heavy silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I don't want any part of what he took, she said, pushing it across the coffee table towards me. My share of the estate. I've already signed it over. It's yours. It should have been yours all along. It was more than I expected. More than I ever thought she'd be willing, or able, to give. In the weeks that followed, Drake and I worked tirelessly to regain control of my accounts. With his unwavering help, the banks reversed the fraudulent transfers, and the long, arduous legal process began, slowly, painstakingly, restoring what had been stolen. Not just my money, but my rightful place in my father's legacy. Serena stayed involved, quietly signing over her portion of the tampered estate. She wanted nothing more to do with the house, the inheritance, or the lingering remnants of Gideon's corruption. And then, one crisp Saturday morning, I drove back to the lake house. It was different now. Without him there, it was quieter. Lighter. The very walls no longer hummed with Gideon's oppressive control. Instead, they felt like mine again. I spent the entire day repainting scuffed baseboards, repairing broken hinges, meticulously restoring what had been neglected and defiled. Every single brush stroke, every nail hammered into place, felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself I'd thought was gone forever. Eli came with me. Still recovering, but strong enough to explore, his little feet echoing softly on the hardwood floors, stopping now and then to peek into rooms like he was meeting them for the very first time. Before we left, I placed his stuffed blue bear, the one I'd clutched in the car during my lowest, most desperate moment, on the mantel in the living room. It looked small against the wide wooden shelf, but it meant absolutely everything. It wasn't just a toy. It was a powerful reminder of why I'd fought. Why I hadn't disappeared when despair had almost swallowed me whole. As I stood there, Eli's small hand nestled in mine, sunlight streaming through the wide lakehouse windows, I felt a profound sense of peace. A peace I hadn't known in years. They tried to erase me, I whispered, not to Eli, not to anyone in particular, but to myself, to the silent, echoing walls. But I'm still here. And this time, no one takes from my family. Not again. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar in courtrooms or make screaming headlines. Sometimes, it's quiet. A signed document restoring what's rightfully yours. A repaired door in a house once stolen. A sister weeping her broken regrets in your living room. Sometimes, justice isn't loud at all. It's a worn blue bear on a mantel, and a sun's smile in the warm sunlight.